All right, welcome to Sass Bites. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I am Micah Godbolt, your bringer of Sass today. You can follow me down there at Micah Godbolt or follow Sass Bites directly at Sass Bites. This last week was actually the week that Sass Bites now has more followers than me. It is more popular than I'll have to accept it. Anyway, this week of Sass Bites is kind of exciting. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about. Not getting any audio. Let me double check the audio is coming through. Mic. Looks like it's coming through, so hopefully everyone's getting it. Throw up some questions in the sidebar if it's not coming through. So I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about this week, and then realized that I've been playing around with Sass 3.4 for last week, and was like, duh, let's talk about Sass 3.4. So this came about from a post. I'm trying to think if Chris Epstein tweeted out or not. But on the Sass GitHub page, which I'm going to tweet out in a second as well, the Sass changelog actually has 3.4 unreleased, talking about the changes that are coming in 3.4. And I asked Chris, like, how can I see this? I want to play with it. And he tweeted out a couple instructions. It was actually quite simple, and I'm going to walk you through that as well. So let me go ahead and tweet that out. Here's the change logs. Oops. Here is the change log. All right, that's tweeted out on Sass Bites. You can check that out. Great. So you can go there and kind of follow through what I was reading, but I'm going to walk you through the installation process and as well show you just a couple of the new changes in 3.4, and I'm going to do the rest of them next week because there's a lot to cover here. So again, this is Sass Bites. If you want to catch up with old episodes, you can catch us at youtube.com/sassbites, and all of our previous 43 episodes are going to be available there. So let me jump over to screen sharing. Here we go. Great. So here's that link. Again, I just tweeted it out because it's super ridiculously long blob on GitHub. But what it's going to be talking about, and I can just bring it over, it's a changelog right here. And it's talking about 3.4 unreleased, as well as apparently there's some features in 3.9. They're just about to be released as well. So that's a great place to get all those updated changelog stuff. So the way you can install this is what you need to do is you first need to download. Let's bring that back. You need to clone the Git repo, which if you've never cloned a Git repo, might be a different story for a different talk. But you just need to grab the Sass Git repo. As you can see, there's a couple branches here. There's stable, and there's also master. Stable is the current release. Master looks like it's pretty much the head of their production. So right now it's at 3.4. So you're going to want to git clone that, which you can do right there. And then once you have that installed, and I've got it right here. I've got Sass 3.4, all this stuff here. So once that's cloned down and you hop into the folder, what you want to do is you want to build the gem, because right now it's just a bunch of files in the Git repo. But if you do gem build sass.gemspec, that's going to look for the sass.gemspec file and build it specifically for that. And you can see what that's going to do is that's going to build out, make it nice and big. It's going to create this 3.4.0.alpha.gem. So it's going to create that gem file. So the next thing we need to do is get that gem file into our gem library to get that actually installed into our system, which is this gem file, this gem install command right here. So gem install and that exact file name. So if this changes to 3.4.1 or whatever, just make sure you're using that same file name. And that's going to install it in there, parsing documentation. It's going to do that whole process that happens anytime you install a gem. So now, if I do sass-v, I'm going to get that I'm running Sass 3.4.0. And I can uninstall that, reinstall it. You know, it just runs like a regular gem. You just need to install it from that directory because that's so it knows where that gem's coming from, because it's obviously not up on. You built it locally, so it's not up on rubygems.org yet. All right. So with that installed, I now have a project here. It's taking up way too much of the page. I now have a project that is going to be a bunch of stuff running and using that. basically, I've just got a bunch of files here. I'm going to be compiling using this new version of Sass. And I've got a couple things in here just so you can see this. Obviously, we don't have Compass. I don't even know if we have Compass support for it yet. So I'm just using the standard Sass watch. So Sass watch, I'm going to tell it that I'm going to be looking at the SCSS folder, compile it to the CSS folder. I turned off source maps just so I wouldn't have the extra noise. You obviously don't need that. Basically, source maps is now defaulting to being on, so it's just automatically going to create source maps for you. And I want style expanded, so it's not compressing anything. And that's what all my commands are there. So yay, it's running. All of that stuff is in the past. I don't have to worry about that not working. So let's talk about the big change in Sass 3.4. Audio started working. Great. All right. So Kendall was just asking about the audio, and it seems to be working now. So that's good. So the big change in Sass 3.4 is something that I was actually hoping was going to be showing up in 3.3, and it didn't. It got pulled out because of must have been some incompatibilities or some errors that they were just wanting to fix. So they had to push it back to 3.4, and I'm just glad that it didn't take them long to get to it. This should be coming out hopefully pretty soon. They didn't give any specific date, but it looks like they're rolling releases out pretty quickly now, rather than doing large releases. Doing more semantic versioning, I think is kind of what they call it now. So the big change is this little ampersand. Hello, little ampersand. So beforehand, it was pretty strict as towards what you could do with it. You could basically use it in a selector. You could do like ampersand li or ampersand dot foo, whatever our class is. And that's really the only thing you can do with it, is just use it as that placeholder, or like ampersand hover would mean it's it would take nav ul hover li. So you could do things like that. Very simple uses for the ampersand. It was kind of just a special unit. But now the ampersand is actually fully in Sass script, so we can actually play with it. And what that means is that this ampersand is actually just a variable, and that variable contains some data. So let's look at what this is. On the left-hand side, here's our Sass, and here on the right is how it's being compiled with using Sass 3.4. If I was to do this with Sass 3.3, I'm sure it'd throw an error at me. It just wouldn't work. So what we're doing here is we are, just for the heck of it, we're showing that we can take the ampersand and actually throw it into a variable. So our selector is now set to the value that this ampersand is. And then we're going to say foo. We're just going to print it out right here as selector. So if you look at the right, you can see that the value of selector, which is just the value of the ampersand, is basically exactly what you'd expect, nav ul li. Because when we go here, nav ul li, if I was to use the ampersand here and do hover, we'd expect this to be, come on, there we go. We would expect this to be nav ul li hover. Like that's how we normally expect that ampersand to work. So what we can do now with Sass 3.4 is we can actually look at it as what the value of that actually is. So we print out here, it's actually this nav ul li. In content type terms, this is actually a list. To be more specific, a list of lists. So what this means is that we can actually perform list functions on it. So we can perform list functions to get the length of it, to grab individual elements of it, and to manipulate it. And that's really where the power comes in. This ampersand's not just stuck wherever the context is. Like if this ampersand is inside the li, it's always going to be the same value every time we use the ampersand. There's nothing we do to change it. But now we can actually perform functions on it. So let's talk about some of those functions, some of the basic ones, and then also some of the ones that are built in. So first off, what we can do is we can get the length of that ampersand of this string. And in this case, when we go length of selector, we actually get 1. Now this took me a while. The first time I played with this, and this was actually available in 3.3 at one point, I was like, Chris Epstein, what in the world? Like there's obviously 3 things there. Why am I only getting a value of 1? And it took me a while to figure out it's because this ampersand is a list of lists. And I can actually explain this by just doing one quick thing. So say that I not only want to deal with the nav ULLI, but also the header ULLI. All right. Now you can see our value is 2 because we have 1 list, 2 lists. So what it's actually counting is that base set of selectors. So now we have actually 2 sets of selectors. So what it's doing is even if there's only 1 set of selectors in that ampersand, it still considers it a list of lists. So what that means is that we need to actually dive down a little bit deeper. We need to go with what's the length of the nth selector, or nth selector 1, basically the first selector in that list. And let me go ahead and take this header out and demonstrate a little bit better. So what's that saying is that I know that we've got that the selector is a list of lists. So let's go and find the first list in that list, which is nav ULLI, and then let's find the length of it. So let's find the first one, and then let's get the length of it, and there we're getting VAS of 3. So the length, we have to dive in 1 extra level to actually get that length. And it's one of those things where we're dealing with, there's only 1 of them, we still want that kind of that hierarchy to work. We don't want it to change depending on if there's 1 or multiple in that group. Because if header's in here, obviously we want to make sure that we still have to select. Are we talking about the first set of nav ULLI or the second set, header ULLI? Because if we dive into nth of 2, the length is header div, just throw some random in there. You can see header div ULLI is 4 long. So that's the reasoning for when you do length of the selector, you're always going to get, well, 1 if there's only 1 of them. It's actually counting that top level of lists. All right, that's probably a long explanation, completely not needed, but that was the thing that bugged me, that took me a long time to wrap my brain around. So let's talk about one other thing you can do with this then, is you can actually then dive into, since this is a list of lists, you can dive into that second level list and just pull a single element out of there. So if you want to grab that, the second element in the first list, second element, first list, we can do that. If you want to grab the first one, you can do that one. So what this means now is we can actually dive into the ampersand and grab, inspect, perform list functions, do all that kind of stuff on all that content that was wrapped up in that ampersand. Because before we couldn't touch it. It was just locked in there. There's nothing we can do about it. And this solves a ton of use cases, some really important use cases I'm specifically going to talk about next week because it's a much bigger topic. So with these tools, moving on from here, with these tools, there's a bunch of stuff that we could do. And one, actually, let me show you this. I'll show you one real quick. Is the ability to basically test to see if there's a value there or not. Because if the ampersand does not have anything in it, it'll come back null. It'll come back, no value in here. So we can actually test in a mixin or a mixin. Actually, I really need to be in a mixin, whether or not we're calling it from the root or we're calling it from within something that actually has selectors. So this little mixin basically tests, if the ampersand has a value to it, then we'll do parent exists of true. If it does not have a value, we'll say false. And you can see here, the first one I do, which is outside of, there's no context to it, so it's going to come back and say false. And this one will come with the div, it'll come back and obviously say true. So one of the things we can do with this now is we can pull that value, find out if there's something there or not, and be able to do things differently because of that. And that's great when you have a mixin that you don't know where it's going to be used. You don't know if that mixin is going to be used inside of something or at the root level or what that case is. And so you can actually test for those things before the rest of your mixin runs off. Okay, so that's one kind of custom thing you can do. And you can, there's a bunch more like string manipulations and testings and concatenation stuff that you could do with these tools already. But the nice thing is that Sass gives us, Sass 3.4 gives this to us automatically. We don't have to write a bunch of these functions. Like with similarly with maps, like we have map merge tools that will automatically merge things together for us. We have similar string tools or selector tools, actually what they're called, selector tools, that allow us to do things with selectors that we don't have to build custom functions for. So we're going to talk about two of them. I'm going to talk about nest and append. And if you are following along from that doc, from the release doc, they are the first two in the list. I'll bring it over. I'm just kind of going through here. So here's selector nest and selector append. I'm going to walk you through kind of what those are and how you might use them within your work. So the first one, let's talk about nest. And let's look at the top up here first. So normally when we nest things, foo, bar, baz has the color blue, we can expect the output to be foo, bar, baz with color blue. And that's how things happen when we nest. If we have, say, foo and cux, if I remember how all these things are supposed to work, you can see that it now comma delimitates and has the two of them and does that. So, that's how we expect nesting to work when we build out nesting. Now, yeah, actually, I guess I just kind of did that in this example down here. All right. So what these functions allow us to do is to replicate, there we go, replicate that same nesting using a function. And in this case, the selector nest function can take as many selectors as you want, and it's automatically going to create that nest for you. So you can see right here with the background of green, it does the exact same thing that foo, bar, baz by passing these three selectors into selector nest. And you see it's three selectors, it's a list of selectors without any commas between them. And that will create that foo, bar, baz the exact way that you're doing it up here. Now the question is, why would you ever do that? Well, it's cleaner. It's a function that you can pass variables into rather than having to basically create that manually using a bunch of lost the term. Anyway, having to manually basically print all those out. It's a cleaner way, less error prone, a lot easier to do within a function, within a mixin, to be able to concatenate those together and create that selector. And it could be a selector of any length, and it turns into a function, a lot less error prone. So similar to this, where we have foo, comma, bar, baz, that gives us these two different selectors. We can do the same thing with selector nest. So foo, comma, bar, see those match up perfectly here. And then comma, baz. And it looks like maybe these can be comma delimited as well. Let me see if that's true. Yeah, okay, they can be comma or space delimited, and it works fine. So up here, comma or space delimited. So in here, when we have two lists, then what that's actually going to do is exactly the same as this. So when we have this compound, I guess that's what, I don't know if it's compound, but when we have a list of selectors, and then you nest the selector inside, you get two different sets of selectors. Well, you can do the same thing with selector nest. So the nice thing with this is if it's inside of a function, you're pulling in things from all of your parameters. You don't want to have to worry about maybe how many parameters are sent in or what the state of those parameters are. You can put those into the function, and you can build out those selectors automatically using these list functions. All right, so the next one, or these selector functions. Next one is append. And let's look at those. Append, there we go. All right, so the append this is appending. So if you look up here, we've got foo.bar, and then we're going to append .baz to it with a background of red. So we get what we expect, foo.bar.baz, and we can kind of see this as something a little bit more expected, like with a hover or something like that. That's pretty normal and expected. So foo.bar hover. So that's an append. So we can do the exact same thing here with a function. So instead of nesting that hover inside of foobar, it's going to append it on the end of it. So this is the background of red. I'm going to go pink and show those two different ones. And a color highlights it. All right. So we can use appends to append that selector on the end of whatever that that selector already is. So foo.bar append hover is going to put hover right on the end of it. So That's what I was going to show here. So, and this is what happens when I do stuff yesterday. You can also do this with like suffix. So this is a very good use case where you're doing, say, BEM style stuff. And instead of having to like just manually shove these things together, you can actually do, do a dash dash suffix. Oh, and that apparently broke. What did I do? Can I do 2 dashes? I'm going to have to figure out what's up with that. I'm kind of surprised with that. What's my error? Not a valid selector. Okay. I'll have to figure out what's up with that. But the same idea applies. You can append something to the end of things like that. And I wish I had a better explanation. I think this is just more real-world example. So using our selector functions, we're able to basically replicate the same way that nesting and appending, be able to do like, colon hover or dash suffix. I'm really surprised dash dash. That might be a bug. I might be able to submit that one. So we can replicate those two things inside of using functions as well. So this is really great. You might not be using this like just when you're writing your partials out, but when you're creating functions, when you're creating mixins, this is a great way to be able to create these selectors in a very programmatic way that's going to be much less error prone and much more flexible when talking about taking variable inputs where you don't know exactly what's going to be coming into you. So the next thing I'm going to talk about next week is extending and replacing, and that's where I'm really excited. There's some really great use cases with that. If you want to be able to extend a selector or replace part of a selector, say you want to take one of the classes and flip it, like an open close context or something like that. We're going to talk about that next week and some of the implications of that and what that's going to allow us to do. But suffice to say, I've shown you how to download Sass 3.4, to create the gem, to install the gem, and now you can get in there and you can actually start playing around with that, the lists of lists inside that ampersand, and you can go from there. So my cat's digging through my door, so I should probably say goodbye for now. But I hope you learned something. I hope you get a chance to play with 3.4 for a bit, and hopefully it doesn't completely change by next week when I demo the rest of it. So feel free to shoot me any questions if you have problems installing it, or if you're playing around with some of these new functions. I'm having a good time with them, so hope you are as well. And we'll catch you next week. Thanks. Bye.